It started with a knock so aggressive, I thought someone was being chased by a bear. I opened the door of my lake cabin, brush sawdust off my jeans, and stare into the overly mascaraed eyes of the one person I least expected to see on my weekend off Alyssa Lancaster, the HOA president from my neighborhood back in town. She was standing there on my private property in her wedge sandals, gripping a clipboard like it was a weapon. "This is your last warning, Trevor," she snapped before I could even say a word. "The noise last night violated HOA noise ordinances. You'll be fined $200. I blinked. "Noise? What noise?" Alyssa's nostrils flared like she was about to blow steam. "The music, the shouting, you had a party, it was well past 10. I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You mean the barbecue I had here at my lake cabin?" "Yes," she hissed, like I'd just confessed to arson. I gestured behind me. "Alyssa, this cabin is over 40 miles outside the HOA jurisdiction. You don't get to fine me for anything here." She looked like I'd spat on her croissant. "You're still a resident of the Ridgewood Pines community, and your behavior reflects on all of us." I crossed my arms. "So you drove all the way out here just to give me a fake fine?" She lifted the clipboard. "It's not fake, it's documented." "I have statements." I leaned against the doorframe, already done with this conversation. "From who? The deer? Maybe the raccoons were offended?" She jabbed a finger toward my porch speakers. "Those, you had them blasting," I laughed. It was classic rock, Alyssa. "Not a rave." She turned red, clearly not used to being laughed at. "If you refuse to pay, I'll involve law enforcement. This is a community matter." I raised an eyebrow. "Alyssa, you're trespassing. And if you call the cops out here for a noise fine that doesn't legally exist, you're going to look real stupid." "See if I care," she snapped, spun on her heels and stomped back to her car, a beige crossover with a Ridgewood Pines HOA sticker on the bumper. She peeled off down the gravel path like she was in a fast and furious movie for suburban moms. I figured that'd be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I was stacking firewood when a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. A tall, gray-haired deputy stepped out, adjusted his belt, and gave me a polite nod. "Morning, sir. Got a call from a woman named Alyssa Lancaster. Claims you're violating HOA noise codes and refuse to comply." I sighed. "Let me guess she didn't mention we're outside the HOA boundaries." He gave a half smile. "She did, but she insisted it was a community emergency." I gestured around. "Just me, the trees, and a few disgruntled squirrels. Does that look like an emergency to you?" He shook his head. "Not even close. You're well outside any HOA jurisdiction. She was told that when she called." I paused. "Wait, told by who?" The deputy scratched his chin. "Dispatch. She's been calling every half hour since last night. Even tried saying you were disturbing wildlife." I barked a laugh. "You're kidding." "Nope, we had to flag her as a nuisance caller, but I had to come check, just to close the file." I thanked him and he took off, but something about this whole thing didn't sit right. And sure enough, when I got back to town Sunday night, a printed fine notice was taped to my front door. Alyssa had made it official. She really thought she could drag my lake cabin into her HOA world. She was about to find out that I wasn't just a guy with a grill and a cabin. I was also a licensed land surveyor, and I had maps, deeds, and records that were about to make her life very complicated. Monday morning, I walked into the county records office with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Inside were the original land survey plats for both my home in Ridgewood Pines and the lake cabin. I'd pulled them from my own archives benefits of being a land surveyor with a stubborn streak and a well-organized filing system. The clerk, a woman named Shelley with a voice like gravel and a coffee mug that read, "Not today, Brenda," gave me a once-over. "You look like someone about to light a bureaucratic fire," she said, flipping through the folder I handed her. "I'd like to get an official certified map showing where HOA jurisdiction ends and where my private property begins," I said. Shelley raised an eyebrow. "Someone trying to play HOA cowboy again. They're trying to fine me for what I do on land that's a 40-minute drive from the neighborhood. She let out a low whistle. That's bold, even for Ridgewood Pines. Yeah, and now she's got a printed notice on my door. I need something to make it legally clear she's crossed a line. Shelley stamped a request form and slid it back to me. You'll have it by Thursday. You want it emailed or printed? Both. I want to frame one and hand-deliver the other. By the time I got home, I had 3 voicemails from neighbors. Apparently, Alyssa had gone door to door over the weekend telling people I'd refused to cooperate with community values and was a growing concern. That phrase stuck with me, sounded like something you'd say about a mold problem, not a guy who grilled some burgers and played the Eagles at his own cabin. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I got to work setting up a dash camera in my truck and a video doorbell at my front porch. I had a bad feeling she wasn't done. I was right again. Wednesday afternoon, I came home from a job site to find a landscaping crew digging a trench along the side of my yard. I hit the brakes so fast gravel sprayed into the gutter. I jumped out and stormed over. "Hey, what are you doing?" "This is private property," one of the workers looked up, confused. "We were told to install a drainage line. HOA said it was part of a runoff management plan." My jaw clenched so hard I thought I heard something crack. "Did they give you written permission from the property owner?" He tilted his head. "We have a work order from Ridgewood Pines HOA. It says it was approved by the board." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "You're going to stop now. This is unauthorized." "And I'm calling the sheriff." The crew didn't argue. They packed up, clearly not eager to be caught in the middle of whatever this was. I took photos of the trench, which had already cut through my underground sprinkler line. Water soaked through the soil like a bleeding wound. By the time the deputy arrived, I had the footage queued up and the work order photographed. His name was Camden, mid-30s, sharp eyes, and a demeanor that said he didn't like wasting time. "Sir, the crew says they were following HOA instruction. Did you give them permission?" "Nope." "And my sprinkler system's damaged." Camden took a look at the trench, then checked the coordinates on his GPS tablet. "You're well within your own lot boundaries. They had no legal authority to do this." "Can I press charges?" "For the damage, yes, I'll file a report, but the HOA." "Unless we can prove they authorized this knowing it was off limits, it's a civil matter." That was all I needed to hear. Thursday, I picked up the certified boundary map from Shelley. There it was in black and white, my cabin property and my neighborhood lot, both clearly outside any HOA common use zones or easements. I made 3 copies, one for me, one for the sheriff's office, and one for the county attorney. Then I filed a formal complaint for property damage and trespassing against the Ridgewood Pines HOA. But I didn't stop there. Friday morning, I walked into the HOA's monthly board meeting with a folder in hand and a GoPro clipped to my chest. The room was filled with the usual suspects, retired couples, overly tanned dog walkers, and Alyssa at the center of it, all like Queen of the Beige parade. She spotted me and immediately stiffened. "This is a closed meeting, Trevor." I held up the certified map and the complaint forms. "It won't be for long." There was a murmur from the crowd. "I've got video of your unauthorized landscaping crew cutting into my property, a certified survey proving you have no jurisdiction where you claim, and a formal complaint already filed with the sheriff and the county attorney. This is your last chance to retract the fine, fix the damage, and issue a written apology." Alyssa's voice rose. "You can't just march in here and make demands." I looked at the board members. "She sent crews onto my land without permission. That's criminal trespass and destruction of property. If she did it in your name, you're all liable." One of the board members, a wiry guy with a perpetually nervous blink, cleared his throat. "Alyssa, did we approve any work orders for that address?" She didn't answer. I turned to the crowd. "If she's willing to do this to me over a barbecue she didn't like, what do you think she'll do when one of you crosses her in a way that actually matters?" That hit home. I saw heads nodding. A woman in the back whispered something to her husband and crossed her arms. Alyssa's mask cracked. "This behavior is exactly why you're a problem resident," I slid a copy of the county map onto the table in front of her. And this is exactly why you're about to have a real problem of your own. Enjoy explaining to the sheriff why you authorized trespassing. I left without waiting for a response. That afternoon, I got a call from the deputy. You made quite the impression at the HOA meeting, Camden said. We've had 3 more residents call in complaints against the board. One of them brought up financial irregularities. Is there a case there? There might be. Especially if they used HOA funds for that work order on your property. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sun dip behind the trees outside my window. Then maybe it's time someone audited the whole operation. You thinking about running for the board? Camden asked. I laughed. Not a chance. But I know a few neighbors who might. And just like that, the tide started turning. Saturday morning, I was out restaining the fence when my neighbor Steve walked over. He was holding a folded newspaper and looked like someone who'd just read a headline he didn't quite believe. You seen this? He asked, handing me the paper. Second page, lower right corner. A small column with the heading, Local HOA President Named in County Investigation. My name wasn't in the article, but the details were unmistakable unauthorized landscaping work, resident complaints, and a pending audit of Ridgewood Pines' financial records. They're actually looking into it, I asked, surprised it had happened this fast. Steve nodded. County's not messing around. Rumor is they've already frozen the discretionary fund. I folded the paper and handed it back. That's going to make Alyssa's life very inconvenient, Steve chuckled. She's been pacing her driveway every morning like she's waiting for the sky to fall. I think she finally realized you weren't bluffing. Later that afternoon, I was sorting through receipts in my office when I got a call from Deputy Camden. Just a heads up, he said. County Prosecutor's Office wants a full statement from you. They're opening a civil investigation into the HOA board's use of funds. When? Monday morning, if you're available. They're especially interested in the work order that led to the trench. Turns out the vendor's invoice was submitted as emergency water diversion. I paused. That's not even close to what they told the crew. Exactly, Camden said, and it gets better. The check they used, it came from the Community Improvement Reserve. That money's only supposed to be touched with majority vote. I shook my head. So they're misappropriating funds and lying about the purpose. Looks that way. Prosecutor's office is treating this seriously, and there's more. You know the printed fine notice you mentioned, the one she taped to my door? Turns out several residents got similar ones, all for things that aren't violations by HOA standards, and none of them were approved by the board. Then who's writing them? There was a pause on the line. Just her. Alyssa's been issuing them herself. No board approval, no documentation, just her signature. My jaw clenched. That's fraud. And potentially extortion, he said. If she collected any payments, it's a criminal matter. We're already gathering bank records. After I got off the phone, I called my neighbor Lisa. She was one of the few board members who always kept a cool head and hadn't spoken much during the meeting where I dropped the certified map. I asked if she could meet that evening. She agreed. We sat on her back porch while her 2 golden retrievers lounged at our feet. I've been on the board for 2 years, she said, sipping iced tea. And I'll be honest, most of the time Alyssa just steamrolls everyone. She comes in with the paperwork already filled out, insists the vote already happened, and pressures the rest of us to sign. Why didn't anyone push back? Lisa hesitated. Because the last person who did ended up getting hit with 3 code violations in 1 week. Her trash bin was out 15 minutes late, her mailbox flag was misaligned, and her flower bed was inconsistent with community guidelines. She moved 6 months later. I leaned back. She's weaponizing the HOA, Lisa nodded. It's not about community, it's about control. And the scary thing is, most people just pay the fines because they don't want the hassle. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of the printed notice Alyssa had left on my door. Deputy Camden said several people got these. Lisa studied it. This signature. That's not even the HOA's standard sign-off. She's using her personal stamp. Think the rest of the board would go on record about it. Lisa looked uncertain. Some might, but they'll need protection. Right now, Alyssa acts like she's untouchable. Not for long, I said. Not if the prosecutor's already involved. That night, I sent an email to the county investigator with Lisa's name and number only with her permission. I included photos, timestamps, and copies of every notice I'd received. I also attached a scanned copy of the work order the landscaping crew had shown me, along with the video I'd filmed of them on my property. Sunday morning, I woke up to a non-stop buzz of notifications. Someone had posted on the Ridgewood Pines community forum an anonymous account with a username that didn't ring any bells. They'd uploaded scanned copies of fine notices, work orders, and a spreadsheet that listed every resident who'd received a citation over the past year. The pattern was impossible to miss. Every person who'd spoken up at a board meeting, questioned a budget item, or asked for a vote recount had been hit with violations within the following 30 days. By noon, the post had over 300 comments. Residents were furious. Some were calling for a full recall of the board. Others were demanding refunds. A few were already threatening lawsuits. I stayed quiet. Let it play out. That afternoon, I got a voicemail from Alyssa. Her voice was tight, strained. "Trevor, I think we've had some misunderstandings. I'd like to resolve things constructively. If you're open to it, I'd appreciate a chance to talk privately." I didn't respond. Monday morning, I met with the county prosecutor's office. The investigator, a woman named Dana with a no-nonsense haircut and a legal pad full of bullet points, spent over an hour with me. "I'll be blunt," she said. "We believe there's enough to pursue charges of criminal mismanagement of homeowner funds, falsification of official documents, and trespass under color of authority. If even half the residents who received those bogus fines confirm they paid them, we're looking at financial coercion." "Will the board be held responsible too?" Dana shook her head. "Only if they signed off knowingly. But from what your neighbor Lisa told us, it sounds like Alyssa kept them in the dark. That works in their favor. What happens next? We're issuing a cease and desist to the HOA. No more fines, no more enforcement actions until the investigation concludes. And we've already requested Alyssa's resignation." I left the meeting with a copy of the cease and desist order and a strange sense of peace. It wasn't over, but it was finally headed in the right direction. By Wednesday, a notice was posted on every mailbox in the neighborhood. The HOA board was suspended pending investigation. Alyssa's name was absent from the contact list. An emergency oversight committee had been appointed by the county to manage essential services. Later that day, I saw Alyssa for the first time since the board meeting. She was loading boxes into the back of her SUV, sunglasses on, face pale. She didn't look angry anymore, just hollow. She didn't acknowledge me. I didn't expect her to. I walked past without saying a word, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. Not because she was leaving, but because justice had finally caught up. And for the first time in a long while, Ridgewood Pines actually felt like a community again. The leaves were just beginning to turn gold around Ridgewood Pines when the final blow came not with a bang, but with a thick, unassuming envelope that landed on every doorstep in the neighborhood. Inside, a letter from the County Office of Civil Oversight, a formal notice of dissolution proceedings for the Ridgewood Pines Homeowners Association. The language was dry, but the meaning hit like a thunderclap. The HOA, as it had existed under Alyssa's control, was finished. The county's investigation had uncovered what they called systemic misuse of authority under the pretense of community governance. In plain English, Alyssa had been running the HOA like a personal fiefdom, and now it was being taken apart piece by piece. I found out the full scope of it that afternoon during a scheduled debrief with the lead investigator, Dana. We met in a quiet county office just outside city limits, where she laid out everything they had uncovered since the audit began. She created a shell vendor account, Dana said, tapping a manila folder with neatly labeled tabs. Filed it as property upkeep solutions. Used it to funnel payments for fake maintenance jobs, things like wildlife mitigation and seasonal soil balancing. None of these were real services. The invoices were fabricated, all signed by her, I asked. Every last one. She listed herself as the community liaison, and the payments went to a checking account in her maiden name. I leaned back in the stiff metal chair, the fluorescent light buzzing faintly above us. How much did she take? Just over $38,000, Dana said, spread across 22 bogus work orders. And the board didn't know. She kept them in the dark. Most never saw the full financial reports. She'd summarize them at meetings, never hand out the originals. She get arrested? Dana gave a curt nod. Taken into custody this morning, she's being charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and criminal trespass. Bail was denied. I had to sit with that for a second. It was one thing to know she was corrupt, it was another to realize just how deep it went. She's also being sued by 3 residents, Dana added. They paid those fake fines. And there's talk of a class action. Outside the county office, the sky was heavy with clouds, but the air felt lighter than it had in weeks. I drove back through the neighborhood slowly, watching as people stood in driveways, reading the county letter, talking in hushed tones. There was no outrage this time, just quiet relief. At home, I pulled the printed letter from my mailbox and added it to my growing file. Then I went to the garage and opened a box I hadn't touched in years, my old land use law textbooks from college. I'd kept them for sentimental reasons, but now they had a new purpose. 2 days later, I hosted a meeting in my backyard. Word spread fast, and nearly 30 residents showed up, some with folding chairs, others with notepads, all of them hungry for something Ridgewood Pines hadn't seen in years: transparency. I stood by the fire pit, a whiteboard propped behind me, and laid everything out. We've been living under a system built on threats and silence, I said. That ends here. The county's giving us a choice. We can let them appoint a long-term administrator, or we can rebuild the HOA from scratch with a new charter, new bylaws, and total oversight. Why even keep an HOA? Someone asked from the back. After all this? Because we still need infrastructure management, I said. Snow removal, trash contracts, emergency road repairs. But we don't need a dictator pretending to be a president. We need a cooperative. Steve raised his hand. You planning to run for the new board? I shook my head. I'll help write the foundation, but I'm not interested in holding a seat. This has to be led by the community, not one voice. A few people nodded. Then Lisa stood. I'll do it, she said. I've seen what happens when we don't question things. That won't happen again. 2 others volunteered. A retired school principal named Tanya, and a no-nonsense plumber named Dave, who said he'd spent the last 3 years fixing HOA-approved leak repairs that weren't even needed. We formed a transitional committee that night, drafted a temporary charter, held open discussions on what the new HOA would look like. Everything was documented, public, and posted online. And just like that, the neighborhood began to heal. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Deputy Camden. He sounded oddly cheerful. Just wanted to let you know, he said. We found the receipts tied to the landscaping crew. Turns out Alyssa billed the HOA twice what she paid them and pocketed the difference. Let me guess, listed it as emergency erosion control, close. Catastrophic soil destabilization. I laughed. Out here, that's called a puddle. She'll be in court next month, Camden added. You might be called as a witness. I'll be there, he paused. By the way, that video you took of the crew. It's being used in a training presentation for junior deputies. Glad I could contribute to local education. After we hung up, I went out to the porch and looked across the street. The house that used to display Alyssa's meticulous seasonal wreaths now sat quiet. The blinds were closed. The yard looked a little overgrown. No one had touched it since her arrest, but the rest of the neighborhood was changing. The block over, kids chalked up a brand new hopscotch grid on the sidewalk, something Alyssa used to fine people for, claiming it altered the visual harmony. Down the street, a man finally installed the porch swing he'd been threatened over last year. And next door, Steve replaced his mailbox with one that looked like a miniature lighthouse, just because he'd always wanted to. It wasn't rebellion. It was restoration. The lake cabin, meanwhile, had become my weekend refuge again. No more sudden visits, no more clipboard threats. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the water lapping the shore. I installed a second security light by the shed not because I was worried, just because it felt good to finish a project with no interference. One Saturday, I brought out a few neighbors for a cookout. Tanya brought her famous smoked ribs. Dave showed up with a cooler full of craft beer. Lisa brought index cards with notes for the next community vote. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the fire pit crackled to life, I realized something. This was what community was supposed to feel like. Not fear, not control. Just people gathered together looking out for each other, and all it took was standing up to one power-hungry woman with a clipboard and a god complex. Well, that and a certified land survey, a camera, a few sheriff's reports, and a whole lot of neighbors who finally decided enough was enough. Justice didn't always come fast. But when it did, it came with handcuffs, court orders, and a neighborhood that no longer walked on eggshells. Ridgewood Pines was free, and I had my cabin, my peace, and a legacy of barbecue justice that no one was forgetting anytime soon.